Taming the High Cost of College, Episode 89.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello, and welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. Today we've got a great interview with Nathan Fox. He is an LSAT teacher. He has various courses and a website that helps students understand the LSAT and do better on the LSAT. And for those of you that don't know, the LSAT is a test that students take during college as part of the admissions process for becoming an attorney. So in order to get into law school. So we learned a ton about the LSAT as well as what it takes to ultimately become an attorney. So for parents out there that have students that are thinking about law school and trying to figure out their undergrad path to law school, or if they just want to be an attorney and they're not sure what path to get on, there's a lot of great information in this podcast, again, about how law school works, how the LSAT works, and kind of understanding the bigger picture. I think parents of students that, may still be in high school, but if they're thinking about law, if you don't understand the process, this is a great place to start and really understand what it's going to take to get into law school. Just as a quick reminder, if your student isn't on the law school path, there are other podcasts out there that I have. If you're interested in theater, we've got podcast number 38 for performing artists and that type of thing. If you're interested in medical professions and med school, there's number 52 out there, which will interview with Ryan to help you understand getting into med school. And then finally, we also have a podcast out there for culinary arts, podcast 55. All of those professions have kind of unique paths as well, getting through school and going on to either grad school, or in the case of culinary arts, it's a much more of a hands-on situation. So those paths are all pretty unique, and if you're interested in any of those, you certainly can go back to the archives on the website and find those podcasts. Also, they're available in iTunes, but they can be found as well. All right, as always, we have show notes available at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/89 for this episode, which is number 89, where Nathan's contact information as well as a bunch of free resources are available. So if you're driving, you don't need to write things down. You can go to the website and look things up when you have the opportunity. And as always, we appreciate reviews. If you can get to iTunes or Stitcher and let us know what you think of the show and give us a good review. Be honest, but hopefully positive, and we'll go from there. All right, let's jump into the interview with Nathan. All right, today I'm sitting down with Nathan Fox. He is an LSAT teacher. Welcome, Nathan.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so I guess the first question is, what the heck is an LSAT?
LSAT is the law school admission test. And no, it's not the bar exam. Everybody always asks me that. I know you wouldn't, Brad, but everybody asks me. The law school admission test is the test you take before law school. And it's kind of the biggest determinant of not only where you get in, but how much scholarship money you get, et cetera, when you go to law school.
Okay. So how did you get involved with the LSAT then? Are you an attorney yourself, or how did this all come about?
I did go to law school, but I never practiced law. I started teaching LSAT while I was in law school. I fell into it kind of backward, really. It was a very lucky find for me. I've always been good at standardized tests, and I was teaching GMAT, actually. That's the test you take to go to business school. And the company I worked for, this was 10 years ago now, the company I worked for needed an LSAT teacher, so they paid me to take the LSAT, and then I immediately started teaching LSAT. That was in 2007. But and I went to law school as well from 2008 till 2011, but I never practiced law.
All right. So you took the test as kind of a guinea pig, and then taking law school so you could learn all the, well, I guess you wouldn't need the information because they're not expecting you to know law before law school. That would be the bar that you'd be studying for.
Right, exactly. Yeah. No, I went to law school really because I didn't know what else to do with my life at the time, which is a pretty bad reason to go to law school in retrospect. I don't think I ever should have been there. I had a day job at the time that I just wasn't into, and I was still kind of trying to find my path. And I had a good LSAT score, so it was easy for me to get into law school. That's really, though, not a good reason to go either. So, as it turns out, law school was not the right choice for me, but I landed on my feet because I ended up with an LSAT business at the same time.
Okay, so yeah, that was going to be my next question. So, what is it that you actually do around the LSAT currently?
So I teach classes, live classes in both San Francisco and Los Angeles. I go back and forth between San Francisco and LA. I'm in LA right now. And I do one-on-one private tutoring via Skype. All this information, by the way, is on my website, foxlsat.com. I have an online class that's like an on-demand streaming LSAT class that you can do from home. And I have a podcast, the Thinking LSAT podcast, where we talk all about law school admissions and LSAT prep.
All right, so it sounds like you do all things LSAT. So you're the guy to talk to, it sounds like.
I might know more about the LSAT than anyone else in the world. Yeah, that's a very weird little brag that I have. But no, I am the LSAT guy.
All right. So I guess you gave us the basics. The LSAT is a test you take to get into law school. I guess tell us a little bit about the typical process then. My audience typically is parents of sophomore, junior, seniors in high school. Now, a couple of them are probably, their ears are perking up because their son or daughter has said, I want to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
And at the stage when you're still in high school and saying, I want to be a lawyer, they're trying to figure out their path. So let's start with some of the basics. What's a typical timeline for law school? I mean, when do you take the test and that kind of stuff?
Right. So if we're talking about college students who go straight ahead to law school without taking a break in between, and I'm not saying I recommend that, but that is a path that many people take. They'll be 21 years old and they'll be in their first year of law school already. For students who are on that path, they probably start preparing for the LSAT in their sophomore or maybe junior year of college.
Okay.
Law school admissions go on a 1 year in advance kind of cycle. So you really need to get your applications in like before Thanksgiving of the year before you want to start school. And you need to have your LSAT completed before that. And you need to do your LSAT prep before that. So students and parents are often surprised that their sophomore in college is already preparing for the law school admission test, but it is kind of the optimal time to do it if you really want to go straight to law school.
Okay, so can you describe the LSAT a little bit? How does it compare to what most parents are dealing with right now, which is like the ACT or SAT?
Yeah, I can't, I'm not an ACT or SAT expert, so I don't, and I know they just changed the SAT as well. There's no math on the LSAT. That's one big difference. Okay. The LSAT is a test of English language abilities. It's a test of logic, and it's kind of a test of how hard you can work. The reason I say that is because there are now 80 released practice tests that you can take for the LSAT. These are real official LSAT tests that become practice tests. They become available for study after the test. So with 80 of these practice tests, it makes the test very studyable. I don't even think that's a word, Brad, but I'm going to say studyable.
Okay.
You really can learn the LSAT by using these practice tests. So people will do I'm not saying people need to do 80 practice tests, but some students do all 80 of those practice tests. I've even had students tell me they've done all 80 of the tests multiple times as they prepare for the LSAT. So the typical prep process is probably something like 3 months, but I have heard of people studying for a year or 2 years or more because it's so important for law school admissions.
Okay, so similar. So there's obviously you work in the prep part of it, so you can prep for the LSAT, and it sounds like you probably should in many cases. So, and then can you take the test multiple times, or how often is it offered?
Right. Yeah. These are all really good questions. So the test is offered 4 times a year, February, June, one in the fall, and then December. So February, June, September, or October. This year it's September, and then December. 4 times a year. And you are allowed to take the test 3 times in any 2-year period. Law schools, when they do admissions, they really, almost every school cares about your highest score and will ignore your lower scores. So that's a bit of a myth, by the way. 10 years ago, some law schools would average your LSAT scores if you had multiple scores on record. But these days, really, it's just the highest one that we're concerned with. So that does kind of put the incentive in place for people to take the test multiple times.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I would never advise people to just, I'm not saying take it 3 times and then we'll just, one of those scores will be okay. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is if you're fully prepared when you sit down to take the test the first time, things can still go wrong. And if they go wrong, and if you score a few points lower than what you scored on all of your practice exams, then you probably should take it again because your official record just doesn't demonstrate your actual ability. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like hope for the best and plan for the worst sort of thing. I try to tell my students to have one test date on their calendar where they're going to really crush it, and then 2 backup dates after that date in case, they swing and miss on that first pitch.
Right. Okay. So then again, if you're doing the direct route, you'd be taking this test. You need to have it all done by beginning of your senior year.
Right. Yep.
So to have 3 tests, you'd probably be taking 3 tests throughout your junior year, fall, winter, and spring of your junior year, let's say.
Yeah, that would be fine. And you could even take it before that. It just depends on when students
right, but that would be time. The latest you could do it.
Right.
If you chose to spread it out and start in your sophomore year, you could.
It would be a lot more civilized, I think, to do it that way, just because, life tends to get busier, right, the older you get. And so students will frequently find that they have an easier semester some point in their sophomore year, or maybe they decide to take the summer between their sophomore and junior years to really prep for the LSAT. If they can get some time off, some time where they're not traveling, some time where they don't have a really tough semester, that's a good time to devote some effort toward the LSAT.
Okay. So when we start talking about the typical admissions test, the ACT and SAT, one of the proverbs out there is one of the best preps for the ACT is high school. Okay. So that means, you take your courses and you pay attention in high school and you'll learn a lot of the math, et cetera, that's on the test.
Yeah.
So is college a good prep for the LSAT, or you actually need different skills or not relevant?
Yeah, I think, life is good prep for the LSAT. People do well on the LSAT who read a lot. So if you're, the summers when I was a little kid sitting there next to a tree reading a book, I was prepping for the LSAT when I was 6. I had no idea what the LSAT was, but just every time I read something, that is definitely good preparation for this test. Other than that, I wouldn't recommend any particular college classes. I think the LSAT is its own unique beast. And because we have all 80 of these practice tests, like I was talking about earlier, the best way to prep for the LSAT is really by doing a whole bunch of these practice tests. Okay. If you understand the old tests, then you understand the test you're going to be faced with, on your test day.
Okay. So, and again, another analogy, I believe that on some of these other tests, you need to have certain courses, like physics is going to be on a particular test for certain directions.
Right.
And therefore, if you've never had physics in college, you're at a very strong disadvantage than if you did take that course. And the same could be said about the ACT, right? You have to have a certain amount of math in high school to really be prepared for the math section of the ACT. So what you're saying for the LSAT is there is no, these are the topics you need to learn.
No, it is not a substantive test at all. It's a test of English language abilities and logic, and a test of how much you have practiced the old tests. There's a section on the LSAT that everybody refers to as logic games. The makers of the test call it analytical reasoning, but we call it logic games. And what that section is these weird little puzzles that'll be like, you know, 7 clowns getting out of a clown car, and they all have different colors on. And then they give you clues about the names and colors of, and the order of who has to get out before whom. And then your job is to just figure out the order or answer questions about the ways that the order can work out. That's the logic games. And everybody hates the games when they first start. Everyone is terrible at the games when they first start. But that's an example of a section that is just really, really practicable. Again, you can do so many of those games, you get really good at those games, and then you'll be ready on the day of the test. But there's, some people say, oh, study formal logic, take a formal logic class in college, or take an economics class or a computer science class. But none of those classes are really preparing you for these LSAT logic games. The way to prepare for the LSAT logic games is to just do a whole bunch of the LSAT logic games.
Right. Okay. So, well, I guess that's one section. Can you give us an idea what a couple of the other sections might be?
The other two would be more familiar to students. One section is just reading comprehension. So those are long passages and then a bunch of questions about the long passage, just to test if you understood what you read. And then half the test, 2 of the 4 scored sections, 2 of those sections are called logical reasoning. The logical reasoning section presents you with short arguments that are usually flawed or incomplete in some way. And then you're asked to do something to that argument. Maybe you're asked to strengthen the argument. Maybe you're asked to weaken the argument. Maybe you're just asked to describe the argument, like what was the main conclusion of that argument. The logical reasoning questions are learnable. They're also really intuitive to a lot of people. If you're a very strong verbal performer, if you're a really good reader and writer, then the LSAT is probably going to be easier for you than it would be for someone else.
All right. Well, great. Let's kind of bring this back home to people that are saying, well, we're not really worried about law school right now. I mean, it's in our future, but we got to get the first step done, which is our undergrad.
Yeah.
If we're trying to put together a path to law school and then ultimately lawyer, what kind of majors or what should you do as far as choosing your school or major in the undergrad world? Does it matter? Or is there right and wrong there, or what's typical?
I always say you can go to law school with any undergraduate major. I think it's far more important that a student pursues their passions during their undergraduate career, no matter what their eventual career path will be. They need to get good grades. Grades are one of the 2 primary determinants of how you get into law school, where you get into law school, and how much scholarship money you get. It's the LSAT and your undergraduate GPA. Undergraduate major is not really part of that equation because there literally is an equation. They take your LSAT score and your GPA, and they do some math on those 2 factors, and then they give you one index number. That one index number will be compared to all other candidates. So things like your major and which classes you took, they don't really, there's no way of accounting for those in this index formula. So I tell people, study what you like, get really good grades, and that's going to be as much as you need to do as far as choosing majors for law school, for pre-law. You do not need to have a pre-law major.
All right. So how competitive is getting into a law school? I mean, I'm sure certain law schools, the Harvard Law School or any other top-rated big name is extremely competitive. But what about the typical law schools? Or, I mean, is it hundreds will apply, 5 get in type of thing? Or is it not quite that bad?
I have so much to say on this topic. Law school applications are down. They've been down for the past, coming up on a decade now since the financial crisis. it was kind of the peak was right at the financial crisis. So right when I was in law school, 2008, 2009, there were bigger entering classes at many law schools than had ever been there before. Law school application numbers were through the roof. Over the past 10 years, law school applications have been cut almost in half. The number of people taking the LSAT is down by like 50%. So that kind of makes it a buyer's market, right? Less applicants is good for applicants.
Right.
So your question, though, was how competitive is it? I would say it is very competitive for some students at the margins at every school, right? So to put that another way, if you as an applicant apply to, let's say, 10 or 15 schools, which I would always recommend that we apply broadly so that we get a broad range of offers. But if we apply to 10 or 15 schools, most candidates will be a shoe-in at some of those 15 schools and will be a stretch at some of those schools.
Right. I have very little experience, and I think most parents have very little experience. So let me give you an analogy. You can kind of look at a person's statistics and say, you're just not going to Harvard or Yale or an Ivy League, right? You need to have stellar everything in order to do that. On the other hand, you might say, well, these are pretty strong numbers. You have a good shot at these types of schools.
Yeah.
And then you can say, well, these numbers are just not very good for anything. But there are colleges out there that cater for kids that have it done very well anywhere ever. I mean, there are colleges out there that will take the C and D student who didn't even bother to take the ACT. I mean, so it's possible. I mean, you may have to pay more. It may not be as recognized as the top schools, obviously, but there are spots for just about anything.
Yeah.
Whereas when you get to med school, the way I understand it is there's just certain people that they can say all day that they want to go to med school, but if they're getting C's in their freshman biology already, there's a good chance that they need to pick another path because they're not, you're going to need to have a 3.5, 3.8, 4.0 GPA and strong test scores and, your history. And again, there's that 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million kind of kid that can turn it around and do it. But most people that are going, that are kind of failing along that path need to pick a different path or understand that they really have to step it up. And I think, so again, another part of that analogy, I have people tell me that they're going to go to XYZ school. And, I say, well, it's possible. It's just not very likely. Make sure you have lots of other options on your list.
Yeah. Right.
Can you kind of translate that story into law school? I mean, is it there's certain lines you need to cross to have a shot or?
Well, I would just say law school is not for everyone. It is really for very hard workers and very hard achievers are the people who I think should be thinking about law school. Law is an extremely competitive field. And if you're the B or C student, I just don't think law school is really where you want to be. It's just amazing when you get to law school how diligent and hardworking everyone is. And so if you weren't really competing GPA-wise in your undergraduate, it's going to get 10 times more competitive once you get to law school because it's all only the best students from every college across the country that are filling up these law schools. There are law schools that will admit people with low grades and low GPA scores, low LSAT scores and low GPAs, but you have to question the value that you're getting at the school you're attending. So you need to look at things like what's the bar passage rate of people who go to this school, and what are the employment statistics looking like for people who graduate from this school, because people end up with $150,000 or more in many cases of debt after law school. And if you're going to a low-ranked school and you're not doing very well there, you might never be able to pay that $150,000 back.
Right. Okay. So, and again, it's a kind of a pie in the sky, but I mean, are we looking for a 3.0 in undergrad, a 3.5, only one B in my entire college career? Where is that?
Higher is certainly better. But, what we could do is we could pick a law school. Do you want to pick a law school in your area?
Sure. Here in Wisconsin, there's only a couple. So there's Marquette and there's UW-Madison, let's say.
Okay, let's look at Marquette. Marquette University Law School class profile. So the median GPA, they had 178 enrolled students last year. They received 1,100 applications.
Okay.
So 1,100 applications ends up being 178 enrolled students.
So they take about 15, 18%. Okay.
They probably take twice that. And only, half of the ones that they admit end up actually matriculating because they also get admitted to other schools.
All right. Okay. So they would take, so 20 or 30%, 10 of which show up. Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, something like that. The median GPA was 3.19, and the median LSAT score was 152, which actually is also the median LSAT score, close enough for people, just for the broad LSAT population as a whole. The average LSAT score is about 152. And that's perfect right in the middle of Marquette. So Marquette looks like, to me, a very middle-of-the-road law school.
Okay. So I guess what I've learned there, the 152, can you tell us how the LSAT is scored? I guess we haven't talked about that yet.
Yep, the test is scored from 120 to 180. It's a very narrow score range there. So there's only 60 points in the entire scale from 120 to 180. And my average LSAT class, the starting score in the class will be something like 145, and the finishing average score will be something more like 155. So you can improve, the average student will improve their LSAT score by 10 points or more if they study. I mean, the potential is there. I'm surprised when people can't improve their score by 10 points. I do see sometimes 20 or 30 point increases, but those are rare. But, I usually expect that people can get a 10-point improvement from whatever their starting score was. It's actually worth looking at. I'm looking at these percentiles a little deeper here. The 25th percentile LSAT score at Marquette was 150, and the 75th percentile LSAT score was 155. So there's only 5 points difference between the bottom quarter and the top quarter LSAT scores at Marquette. What that means is if you started with a, say, 148 LSAT score on your diagnostic test, you'd be below the 25th percentile LSAT for Marquette, kind of unlikely to get admitted. But if you improved by 10 points from that 148 and ended up with a 158, that's a very mundane amount of improvement. We expect 10 points improvement. But now you've gone you're well above Marquette's 75th percentile LSAT score. And now not only are you going to get into Marquette, but you're probably also going to get a generous scholarship offer.
Wow. Okay. And then I think we've all heard that, maybe we haven't. So grad school is generally more expensive than undergrad at a comparable institution. Is that what you find? Is law school one of the more expensive?
I don't know how to compare law school to other graduate degrees, but I do know that law school costs $50,000 a year or more in many cases. I was looking at a table earlier. It's amazing how much data you can find out there, but I was looking at a table of how much law school debt people have when they graduate from various law schools. Mm-hmm. Many of the schools in the Bay Area, Golden Gate, University of San Francisco, University of Santa Clara, all three of those schools had total debt of over $150,000 for the students who incurred debt. And it was also something like 75% of the class was incurring debt.
Right.
So yeah, we're talking about we're talking about six figures, and it really is the biggest expense. It's the I tell my students all the time that it's the most expensive thing they're ever going to buy, except for maybe a house.
Right. Yeah. So, and again, just so parents understand, once you get to grad school, parents' information is no longer required as far as financial aid is concerned. Essentially, the parents are off the hook from both providing information and they're not necessarily expected to pay. I mean, you certainly can help your student with law school if you want, but there's no expectation. The flip side is that, and I'm guessing at law school would be similar, there's quite a lot of loan opportunity. So many, and in many various grad schools, people incur quite a bit of debt. And lenders are more likely to lend if they know you're going to graduate with a law degree or graduate with an MD or whatever it might be, dental school, all these types of schools that lend to a relatively good career. You're a lower risk for loans, so it's more likely that you'll qualify for loans.
It's extremely easy to borrow money when you're in law school. That doesn't mean it's a good idea, right?
Right, exactly. So
I actually spend a lot of my time trying to talk people out of the law school path because I just question whether it's a good investment in many cases. If you're going to get out with $150,000 in debt, you really need to have a plan for how you're going to pay that back. And it's not enough to say, oh, well, lawyers make a lot of money, right? I'll be fine. It's just, you need to think about what kind of lawyer you want to be. You need to talk to as many lawyers as you possibly can. You need to have a clear idea that the school you're going to is going to be able to help you reach that goal that you have. Because a lot of people, like I did, just naively go to law school and quickly rack up the debt. You know, you got to make a distinction between financial aid and scholarships. Financial aid in the form of loans is really easy to get, and you just have to remember that you are borrowing from your future self, and your future self is not going to be thrilled that you spent so much money while you were in law school.
Right. And I guess there's a lot of law careers that aren't automatically this huge six-figure salary type of payday. I mean, certainly there are a lot of those, but there's a lot. If you go into public service, you go into the public defender's offices and some of those things, they don't necessarily provide that huge salary. Now, to offset that, a lot of them also do offer some form of loan help or loan forgiveness programs as a way to attract attorneys to their need. But
those are definitely present. I would still prefer the route of not incurring the debt in the first place, if it's at all possible.
Right. So let's, again, looking at the big picture then, if, let's say you have a son or daughter that's looking at doing this and they're saying, well, I really need to, let's not pick on this particular school. So they say, I really need to go to this expensive private school for my undergrad, and then I'm going to go on and get my law degree, but I need to go to this name brand school so that I can get into a name brand law school. Do you think that makes sense to be spending, $200,000 on your undergrad and then another $100,000 or $200,000 on your grad school? Or do you think finding the lower, because a lot of these kids might have the option, right? They could go to a big name brand school and pay a lot of money, or accept a scholarship at a lesser school and not pay nearly as much.
It depends on exactly what we're talking about, exactly the details. Well, they would change my answer a lot, and this nature of the student, him or herself, would change the equation a lot. So it is true that if you want to be a Supreme Court justice, you really do need to go to Harvard or Stanford or Yale Law School. I mean, you're just not going to become a Supreme Court justice from anywhere else.
Right. Now, do Harvard and Yale and Stanford, when they're admitting students, do they care where your undergrad is from? In other words, if I go to a reasonably strong undergrad, but it may be a state school and I get a 4.0 and hit it out of the park, compared to going to Stanford for my undergrad, or NYU for my undergrad, so that I have that name brand, is...
If you have the LSAT score to back up that 4.0, I don't think it matters where you got that 4.0. So I could certainly see a route to Harvard or Stanford or Yale Law that goes through a local community college and a local state school and any major with a 4.0 and a very high LSAT score. you can't fake, the thing with grade point averages is that they can be faked a little bit. You can game it, right? With a really easy school, a really easy major. If you always go see your professors at office hours and beg for higher grades, it is, you still have to put in a lot of work and you have to take exams and write papers and whatnot. But all 4.0s are not created equal. Some are easier to get. But the LSAT score is the thing that you have no choice. Everyone has to take the LSAT. You can prep for it, and you can improve your score a lot with a lot of really hard work. So you certainly can go to Stanford or Harvard, though, with the community college and or state school, not name brand route that will work with the LSAT and GPA.
Okay, that's good to hear. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap things up? As far as, is there any other nuggets of wisdom that you might have?
I would just tell people to get started early and let me know if I can help in any way. My website, foxlsat.com, there's a page of free resources at foxlsat.com/free. Can I give out my contact information?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And
Okay.
We'll put all this in the show notes, so if people are driving or whatever, all this will be at the show notes as well.
Cool. So parents that are interested in getting their kids prepped for law school can always just call me directly, 415-518-0630. You can also email me. I'm nathan@foxlsat.com. Yeah, listen to my podcast if you want more. We talk about law school admissions almost every episode. That podcast is Thinking LSAT Podcast.
All right, so you've got a podcast and free resources, which we'll provide a link to again. Can you describe what the free resources actually are?
Oh, it's all kinds of stuff. Blog posts, videos. There are links to the best books to buy for LSAT prep. There's a link to a 15-hour free LSAT course on my website. Just all sorts of resources for people, no matter what stage of LSAT prep they're in.
All right, so there's anything from the beginner just trying to get their arms around things to study materials. All right, well, great. Well, this has been a wealth of knowledge. I learned a ton. I'm sure my audience has learned a bunch as well. I really do appreciate it, and I would encourage anybody that's interested in learning more to go ahead and contact Nathan. And I guess that's all we have. We'll try and stay in touch with you, Nathan.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brad. I'd love to come back anytime.
All right, well, and thanks for the great information.
Great.
All right, that was a great interview with Nathan. Hopefully you learned what you needed to learn about the LSAT. I want to take a minute and mention we have a free resource on our website for scholarships at tamingthehigh-cost-of-college.com/scholarships. We have what's called the free scholarship guide for busy parents. And this guide is available to help you understand scholarships and determine if your family should be pursuing scholarships or not. A lot of families out there talk about scholarships, but then they never actually do what they need to do in order to win scholarships. So again, this is a guide that's designed for parents to watch. It's a number of videos, about 4 videos. Each one of them is about 10 minutes long. And it'll give you the very basics of how to find scholarships, the types of scholarships, and how scholarships work. And it'll help you determine how much time and effort you should be putting into scholarships. Some families, in my opinion, should work really hard at scholarships. Other families should ignore scholarships altogether and focus on other areas. And the right answer for many, many families is to just find the 2, 3, 4 scholarships that are a really good fit for your student, work hard and do a good job on those limited number of scholarships, and then move on from there. Of course, on top of that, there's also the scholarships from the colleges that you're pursuing and your local high school. And I think every family should look into those on top of the additional scholarships that might be applicable. So if scholarships are in your future, or if you'd like to have scholarships in your future, go to tamingthehigh-cost-of-college.com/scholarships, and you can sign up there, and we will email you the 4 videos, and you can learn what you need to know about scholarships and apply it to your situation and hopefully win big and help pay for school. That's all we have for today. We'll see you again next week.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns two companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.